It's been a while, a good 6 months in fact, since we made some book recommendations. So today we're going to do just that. What follows is a selection of what I've been reading in history in the past 6 months that has blown me away. So let's get to it. First up is To War with the Walkers by Annabel Venning. Now this is the author's second book and it covers the lives of her grandfather and 5 of his siblings from their childhood through the war years. And cards on the table here, I loved this book and still do. It focuses on the 6 siblings starting before the war with an insight into their childhoods and the experiences and environments that shaped them as people. And this is done so well that by the time the actual war breaks out and they're taking up their respective roles in it, you're with them, you're behind them, you care about these people. And once you're into the war, the story splits the family up into their particular places and fates. You've got one of the men fighting in Italy, while another is fighting the Japanese in India, another is captured at Singapore, the fourth working as a doctor on the home front. You've got one of the ladies working as a nurse, dealing with the aftermath of Dunkirk or her experiences of being trapped in St. Thomas's when it took a direct hit. And the fact that this is a family memoir rather than a normal individual memoir also gives it an edge over others, I feel. If I read a typical wartime memoir such as Jeff Whelham's First Light or Jimmy James's Moonless Night, both excellent books by the way, I know the author made it back to write the book. I genuinely didn't know at the start of this book whether everyone was going to make it out alive, and that gave the book an element of suspense for me, which only added to my enjoyment of it. The book really benefits from being written by the granddaughter of Walter Walker, one of the people featured in it. You can tell that a great many family tales of these people have been told over the years, and the prose frequently throws in a family memory that anyone can recognise in their own families. I do not have the author's family or social background at all, and yet when I read about the mother, Dorothea, I could see shades of my own grandmother's stern disapprovals running through her. This just brings you into the family as you read about them. Tea plantations and polo playing aside, this could have been my family. It's an intensely personal story, which you all should read. Now next up takes us away from leafy middle-class Devon and straight into Victorian Birmingham with Carl Chinn's Peaky Blinders, The Real Story. And this sets out the real history behind the award-winning TV drama series. But far from being a companion to the TV series, this book details just how pretty much every detail in the TV show is false. No razor blades in caps, no riches taken off the back of shady arms deals, no taking on the mafia. It paints the picture of the Birmingham street slogging gangs, a member of which is an ancestor of the author. But unlike our previous book, where the relatives are viewed with affection, Dr. Chinn describes his relative as a vicious thug for whom I have nothing but contempt. Far from the glamour of the TV show, this book shows us that Peaky Blinders were not an organised gang, but a style of thug. Thugs that beat a man to brain damage for the crime of drinking ginger beer in a pub. This book shows the violence inflicted with a heavy brass belt buckle for the crime of being from the wrong street. And it covers the police and council's efforts to remove the joint menace of random violence and illegal gambling from the streets of Victorian Birmingham. Now, there are many reasons why I really enjoyed this book. First, it's a great insight into Victorian Britain without getting bogged down in consumptive street urchins, orphans, workhouses and slums. Basically, it's not your usual book about Victorian inner city life, which was refreshing for a start. And secondly, despite it being a whole book about how the TV series is wrong, he doesn't feel the need to lecture anyone for enjoying the TV show. I recall hearing him in an interview actually praising Cillian Murphy for making the Brummie accent sexy, a feat he thought impossible. The book gives you lots of historical fact and background, but doesn't seek to lecture the reader on how superior the historian is, and a few people could learn a thing or two from this. So if you enjoy the series and you want to get the reality, then get this book and you'll find that the truth is just as spectacular as the fiction. Third on the list is an absolute pocket gem, and that is Body Snatchers by Susie Lennox. As you can see, it's a short book, but then I'm not a man for a ponderous tome by any means. But don't let the size of the book put you off. It's a full-on definitive work on the history and craft of illegally procuring bodies for sale to anatomists, and this is something of a personal obsession of mine. The book is packed with real cases and histories, real people where they can be identified, and it's not just focused on London and Edinburgh where most cases would occur. It covers the whole of the country, which means many readers who are interested can use this as a springboard to their own local history. And it's for the keen amateur local history enthusiast that this book really comes into its own, because at the end is an incredible index which references surgeons, places, bodies and culprits, but also a short guide to how the author did her research and the sources, facilities, web databases and old-fashioned dusty archives she used. And this is really useful information when you're researching anything. I like to think I'm a pretty good researcher, but even I found this to be a help. More authors should do this. In summary, it's a short book, very readable and packed with useful information about a crime you probably hadn't thought too much about, unless you know me personally, in which case I'm very sorry. Now next up is not so much a new history, but a different way of looking at a famous event. I'm talking about Guy Walter's book, The Real Great Escape. Now, as any good lover of prison camp escapes and as also someone for whom Boxing Day in front of Steve McQueen and the gang is an absolute must, I approached this book with caution. The author's basic stance here is that despite all the ingenuity of the actual breakout, the whole operation really only achieved the murder of 50 people. In the book, he basically asks, was it worth it? And pretty much comes to the conclusion that no, it wasn't. Now, this is not an opinion many lovers of The Great Escape want to read, but I'd urge you to do so. It's well written, incredibly detailed, and builds a picture of Roger Bushell's character right back into his school days, which gives the reader the full understanding into who he is and why he is so focused and driven towards escapes, even when the threat of falling into the hands of the Gestapo is clear. Bushell's justification of the plan being that hunting such a large number of escapees would divert German men and resources from the rest of the war, and the author explains how, well, it just didn't. How the only men and resources involved in the hunt were Germany's internal police, which were not really the part of the war effort that Bushell wanted diverting. He concludes that Bushell must bear some culpability for his own murder and that of his fellow escapers. Now, as I say, this can be uncomfortable reading for many an escape fan, but the book isn't there to sneer at people or tell them that they shouldn't enjoy a bloody good escape yarn. It's not there to tell you what to think about The Great Escape. It's not there to lecture you that you shouldn't be impressed by the Stalag Luft 3 breakout. It provides a well-researched counterpoint to the Great Escape narrative, and you should read it, because it might change what you think. Last but by no means least, we're continuing down the road of new histories about escapes, and this is Dr. Helen Fry's book on MI9. Now, for those of you that are not POW obsessives or World War II enthusiasts, then MI9 was basically the branch of the intelligence services that dealt with assisting service personnel to escape and evade. It's one of the most often overlooked branches of military intelligence, and it's, for my money, the most interesting. Now, when I come to read a good book on the history of MI9, my default position has always been Michael Foot and Jimmy Langley's book. Given that they're the two people who were pretty much running the show, I wasn't convinced that I could get a better history. Why would I possibly think that anyone else covering the history of MI9 would be worth it? Well, fortunately, this is covered in the intro to the book. Basically, when Foot and Langley were writing their history of MI9, they couldn't talk about everything. A lot of what they did, their own history, was still classified. So Dr. Fry's book brings out the newer information that we're now allowed to talk about, particularly about the use of escaped prisoners as an intelligence gathering resource, which hadn't really been discussed before. I found the structure of this book really delivered because there are a number of ways that you can use it. If you want to read this cover to cover for a narrative history of MI9, then you can. But its chapter breakdown also means that if you want to return to this as a reference textbook, then you also can. I can come back to this when I want to just look at Colditz or the Comet Line or the Far East and go straight to the information that I'm looking for. Thank you, Dr. Fry. Thank you. So, there you have it. That's another 5 books that I think, well, hope you'll enjoy. I certainly did, and we've put links to them in the description below. We'll have another list of recommendations from Kyle in a few weeks, but until next week, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.